Let's journey into mobile, my friends, with tools made up of percentages and M's. Fluid, adaptive, responsive is wise to look good in browsers of any size.
Welcome to Journey into Mobile. This is Level 1, Foundations for Mobile. And in this level, we're going to be covering three main things. First, we're going to be talking about what is the mobile web. Then second, we're going to cover a brief overview of the course. And then finally, we're going to look at relative font sizing. So let's first talk about the mobile web. So what is the mobile web? Well, there's actually no mobile web, in as much as there isn't necessarily, say, a desktop web. You see, this isn't the web. This is the web. And what I mean by that is that the web isn't limited to one particular device or one particular environment. Tim Berners-Lee has a great thought here where he says that the primary design principle underlying the web's usefulness and growth is universality. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the universal web. See, the web must work with any form of information, and it must be accessible from any device. And that's really our responsibility as web designers and web developers, is to make sure that our designs, that our sites work on the universal web, that they don't just work in, say, a desktop environment or just work in a mobile environment. So our goal is to make sure that we are working towards this universal web. Because at the end of the day, this will be the web. We're going to see many more devices come out, many more environments that we're going to have to make sure that our sites and that our applications actually work in. So when we talk about mobile design or adaptive design or even responsive design, really all we're talking about is just web design. So in this course, we're going to look at three main areas. First, we're going to cover fluid layouts and why those are important. Second, we're going to talk about adaptive design. And then finally, we're going to wrap up talking about responsive design. But before we get into any of that, we're going to cover a little bit about fluid typesetting. And here's what I mean with that. Here's the image that we're going to be working with, and let's first take a look at the markup for this image. It's pretty simple. All we have is an H1 with a link inside. Let's take a look at how our styles render for this particular markup. Once again, pretty simple. Our H1, we have it set at 30 pixels for our font size, and this would be fine, except that we want our fonts to be proportional or relative in size, so that when we talk about scaling sites, we can actually have our font scale with us. So instead of having our font size be 30 pixels, we actually want to convert our pixel values into M's. So I'm going to show you how to do that. The standard font size for most browsers is 16 pixels, but as you know, browsers can be kind of finicky. So we want to make sure that for all of the browsers that we're working with, we have a standard font size set on our HTML element. So that's why we've gone ahead and set our standard font size to be 16 pixels. But you'll notice down below that I've also got another declaration for font size in our body element. I've got the size set at 62.5%. Now, what is this for? Well, since our standard font size is 16 pixels, that means that 1 em is equal to 16 pixels. But 16 is kind of a rough number to divide by, and you'll see why that matters in a minute. So what we've done here is we've actually taken 62.5% of 16, which is 10. So we've converted our font size to be from 16 pixels to 10 pixels, which is going to be a much easier value to divide by. Now, why does that matter? Well, we're going to be using this formula in order to convert our pixel values into M's. This formula is target divided by context equals our result. And in this case, our target is our target font size, which we want to divide by the font size of our containing element. And that's going to give us the value that we need for our M's. So in this case, we take our 30 pixels, which was the value of our H1. We're going to divide that by our standard default font size, which is 10 pixels. And then we get our value of 3 M's. So we plug that back into our CSS. In place of 30 pixels, now we have 3 M's. And voila, we've got our relative proportional font size. So that's great. As you can see from our image here, it looks relatively the same. But we still have to work on that link because our link inside of our H1 is now inheriting the properties for our H1. So let's go ahead and do that. For our link, we have it set at 14 pixels, and we need to convert our pixel values into M's. So we're going to use our formula again. Now, would we do the same thing that we did before? In this case, 14 divided by 10. Well, let's see how that looks. Unfortunately, that doesn't work, and that's because we have the wrong context. You see, in this case, our context is not the default browser font size, but actually the size of our H1, because our link is inside of our H1 element. So in this case, we actually need to change our context value from 10 pixels to 30 pixels, because remember, 30 pixels was the original size of our H1 element. So if we do this, we get this value, and we can plug that into our CSS, and now it renders properly. One quick note here. You might have noticed with our last conversion that it's a pretty ugly number, but that's okay. We really should let the browser do the heavy lifting here. We don't need to round up or round down, because this is actually the exact value of our original pixel size. So in this case, we're not going to round. We're just going to keep that value like so, plug it into our CSS, and it's going to work just fine. So why do we spend the time covering relative font sizing? I mean, we're supposed to be talking about mobile design, right? Well, yes, but see, it's important for you to understand the formula for actually converting pixels to ems, because when we start talking about fluid layouts and layouts that scale, we're actually going to be using the same formula. So it's important for you to grasp the concept, and this is a pretty easy way for you to do that. So this level is fairly simplistic, and the challenges might not be all that difficult for you, but that's okay. We're going to get to more advanced stuff later on in the course.